So your, like I said already, your bell work is on Eagle. Go ahead and log into Eagle, answer that one question. While you're answering that question, I'm going to pass back the test from Friday on photosynthesis, and we're going to go over some of the questions on that together. So go ahead and finish up your bell work. And when you do, you can go ahead and turn your chairs facing the middle.
You ready to test?
Yes, I'm about to pass them back. The highest grade in the class is Matthew. Good job. Yes. I'll get them back in a minute. Alright, so like I said, when you're done with your bell work, just turn your chairs towards the middle. We're going to go over a couple of the questions on the test. So, I want to go over the Eagle questions. These questions you might see again on the unit test, so pay close attention as we go over these, all right? This first question gives you the equation for photosynthesis and for cellular respiration. We didn't talk about the equation for cellular respiration, at least not yet. We will later on this week. But we have talked about the equation for photosynthesis, and that was enough to answer this question. So, based on these equations and your knowledge of trees, all right? So, a couple things. We know some things about trees. How do trees obtain energy? Sunlight, right? And they use that sunlight for what process? Photosynthesis, right? And then what's being made during photosynthesis?
Sugar and oxygen.
Right, sugar and oxygen, right? The sugar is the food that's being made during that process. What do we call organisms that make their own food? Autotrophs, right? Are producers, right? Because they're synonyms. You have autotrophs and producers meaning the same thing, that they make their own food. Okay, so we do know some things about trees. So based on these equations and your knowledge of trees, what important effect has the logging of forests had on Earth's atmosphere? Okay? All right, Jason? B. Right, exactly. It is B. It's an increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide. So, now I want to talk about why. All right? Why is the level of carbon dioxide going to go up if we cut down trees? All right, Jordan.
Because if you cut down trees, then it doesn't produce as much oxygen as it did when you had all those other trees.
Okay, well, yeah, so the levels of oxygen, what you're saying then, you're right, levels of oxygen will actually go down because there's not as many trees, right? Okay, you're exactly right, but now tell me why, if oxygen levels go down when we cut down the trees, why do carbon dioxide levels go up when we cut down the trees, all right, Matt?
Because they're not taking carbon dioxide in to use for their photosynthesis.
Exactly. Right, because they're not taking the carbon dioxide in for photosynthesis. So there's fewer trees to take in that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, therefore there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But you're exactly right, Jordan, that means that the level of oxygen is going to go down. Okay, so those are the two effects of logging a forest. All right, of course, which I've said this before, but over half of the oxygen in our atmosphere does not come from trees. It comes from photosynthetic ocean-dwelling organisms like plankton and algae. So, so we're not all going to die off if we kill all the trees, but it's a good thing to conserve the trees. All right. So now this next question was a little bit more tricky. All right, and really the question part was kind of tricky. But if you looked at this diagram, all right, so you have a picture of the chloroplast, which that's where photosynthesis takes place. So the question, this arrow is representing what's being produced. So somebody raise your hand and tell me what's being produced during photosynthesis. All right, Jaden. Oxygen and sugar, right? Oxygen and sugar. Both of those things are being produced. All right, so the question, like I said, was a little bit tougher because it talked a little bit about the mitochondria, which we haven't really got into yet. But if you just looked at the diagram, you should have been able to figure out that this arrow means what's being produced from the chloroplast, and that's oxygen and glucose, all right, or oxygen and sugar, okay? And that would have been A on the test. Now, this last question, I will admit, was a little trickier, but again, I think y'all could have reasoned your way through it, and a lot of people did. So this is a diagram of ATP. All right, the chemical structure of ATP. You have your adenine here, your ribose here, the 5-carbon sugar, and then you have your 3 phosphates. 1, 2, 3. So those are your 3 phosphates. So again, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. What does the prefix tri mean? 3, right? So there's 3 phosphates. So now the question, part A, describe one cellular function that requires ATP. So what cellular function did we talk about last week that required ATP?
Calvin cycle.
Right, exactly, KJ. The Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle requires ATP. Remember, the light-dependent reaction produced ATP for the light-independent reaction, right? Okay, so the Calvin cycle. Now, I think it was in this class, somebody remembered another cellular process that needed ATP that we talked about at the very beginning of the year. I can't remember if it was in this class. It was in one of my classes. I'll give you a hint. When we talked about cellular transport, how a cell moves materials in and out, what process needs ATP?
Active transport?
Active transport, exactly. And somebody put that on the test, and I gave you credit because it also uses ATP. Remember, active transport needs energy in the form of ATP to move materials in and out of the cell. So there's 2 cellular functions that we've talked about this year that require ATP. Now, here's the thing. Y'all got to be careful on this, especially on the end-of-course test. There's actually 2 parts to this question. That's just the first part to this question. A lot of you answered either one or the other, but didn't answer both parts of this question. Now, I'll admit I was lenient on this test. But the second part of this question was, explain what the role of ATP is in that function. All right, so what's the role of ATP? What does ATP do? All right, Jason.
Energy for it's the energy that the cell needs to produce and make things to make.
Exactly, right. It provides the energy. Okay? And a lot of y'all got that part of the question right, but there's pay attention now, especially on the EOC. A lot of the questions, especially the longer questions, will have.
I need a Leo Lane to check out.
Okay. A lot of the questions will have two parts, so you got to make sure that you're answering both parts of the question. Okay. Now, part B. Explain what part of the molecule of ATP is removed when the ATP is used. So what part of the molecule is removed when the energy is used up in ATP? Anybody remember? Well, what do you get when you use up ATP? What molecule do you get after you use up ATP?
ADP.
ADP, right? And that's adenosine diphosphate. What does the prefix di mean? Two. So there's two phosphates. So now tell me.
One phosphate.
Right, one of the phosphates is removed. Now remember the animation that I showed you? When this third phosphate breaks off, remember the... Huh? Well, it was the explosion showing energy, right? There's a little explosion, yeah. And it's showing energy is being released from high energy electrons. So that third phosphate is broken off, so that ATP is then converted to ADP and energy is released. So the question then, what's, like Jordan said, what's being removed? One of the phosphates, exactly. Okay? So one of the phosphates is removed, that third phosphate is removed, and energy is released. All right, I just wanted to go over those questions because there's a chance that you'll see them again on the unit test, on the Eagle test. All right, plus you need to remember that stuff for the end-of-course test. Now, this week, what we're going to be focusing on, and I kind of mentioned this Friday, we're going to be focused on ecology. Ecology is talking about how ecosystems, right? It has to do with ecosystems and how the organisms in those ecosystems relate to one another and to their environment, all right? So we talked a little bit about food chains and food webs really quickly on Friday. There's a couple of vocabulary words that I think are important to review again. Autotroph, can somebody tell me again what the meaning of autotroph is? All right, Jordan.
Something that produces its own food.
Right, something that produces its own food. And then what is the synonym for autotroph, KJ? Well, that's the anonym, but the synonym for autotroph. Meaning, yeah, producer, exactly, right. So producer, autotroph, you're going to need to know that vocabulary word for the little activity that we're about to do. Now, heterotroph, somebody give me a definition of heterotroph. Anybody else can do it other than the two of you? Anybody? Tanner? Heterotroph. How do heterotrophs?
It doesn't make its own food?
Right, it doesn't make its own food. Right, heterotrophs have to consume food. So what's the synonym for heterotroph?
Consume.
Consumer, right, exactly. Consumers have to consume food for energy. Okay, so those are some vocabulary words. Now there are different types of consumers depending on what they eat. What type of consumer only eats plants?
Herbivore.
All right, Jordan.
Herbivore.
All right, herbivore, right? Herbivores. What type of consumer only eats other animals, Ben? Carnivore, exactly. Very good. All right, and then which eats both? All right, Tim.
Omnivore.
Omnivore, right? Okay. Of course, which are we?
Omnivore.
Omnivores, right? Okay, very good. So those are a couple of vocabulary words. Very easy. Now, what did we say is always at the bottom of the food chain? All right, Jace. Autotrophs. Autotrophs are always at the bottom of the food chain. Why, again, are autotrophs always at the bottom of the food chain? All right, Eric.
Because they produce their own food.
Right, because they produce their own food, and where do they get their energy for that, Eric? The sunlight, right? Yeah, they get their energy from the sun. So where does all the energy for life on Earth come from? The sun, right? But remember I told you we can't go outside like Superman and power up the yellow sun, right? So, but plants can. Okay? Plants use the energy from sunlight, and so when the animals eat the plants, they